Hi, everybody. I am thrilled to be here. Like Hillary said, my name is Aaron Masliansky. I host a podcast called Inside the Skev, and I interview people all around Skokie and Evanston primarily. My day job is a real estate agent, but I have this passion to get to know these stories and share stories with people. So I've been doing several interviews for the JCC, and I am thrilled to be interviewing now Ina Pinckney and Mercedes Kane, and they have a terrific movie called Breakfast at Ina's that they made. It's a documentary about Ina and her restaurant. And, before we start asking questions, I just want to open up by telling a story of my first experience coming to your restaurant. So this is years ago, and friends with this guy he's a wonderful photographer, architectural photographer. And I went over to his studio, which is not that far from where Ina's was. And he's like, come on, we got to go to Ina's. It's the best place. I go there like all the time. I love it. And he's like, but when we go there, he's like, I want you to drive my car. I'm like, why? He's like, it's a Porsche 911. So I drove through the streets of Chicago in the West Loop, and he told me to floor it and all around. And then we show up at the restaurant, and it was such an awesome, fun, and memorable experience.
That's great.
Yes, and it was just such a great way to be presented to your restaurant and to your story. And I love it, and I love the movie. And I think this is an easy question for Mercedes because there's so much richness to the story. But how did you decide to make this movie, this film?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I had never been to Ina's, surprisingly, and I didn't know Ina, but I read a article that was in the Chicago Tribune that was about her when she was getting ready to close her restaurant after, the 35 plus years that it had been opened. And when I read the article, first I was just interested in it, thinking it was just, about her restaurant. But the more I read, the more I realized, to your point, Aaron, that, it was just all these layers and layers of this woman's story that were so surprising too. And I thought, this should really be a story that more people hear. And then, so what I did was my husband, who was the cinematographer on the project, he and I went to Ina's and kind of scoped it out. And when we got there, we really saw that she had built this community in her restaurant, and that it was more than just, a restaurant, that it really was community, and it was relationships, and it was a place that was so special to people in a really unique way. And I think in a way that is unique, but also a way that restaurants do and that people maybe take for granted. And I actually think during this time, people are maybe realizing more than ever that restaurants do play this role in our lives. But Ina has such a unique relationship with her customers and with the restaurant community that I was just really taken by it. And so Sang-Hoon and I went back and we met with her, and then, meeting with her, and we actually had breakfast with Ina on our first meeting. And I mean, just talking to her was just a no-brainer.
Yeah, it's such a terrific story. And I think it's true. There's so many great stories of people throughout these communities that, I've learned personally from doing my podcast and doing a film. I think it just opens up so much more of the visual aspect of it, seeing the customers come in. And it's a deeply personal story. I know, it was very, very personal for you. How was that to be able to share those intimate moments of your life with strangers?
Well, there's two parts to that. So when Mercedes said, can we do this and document the last 31 days of Ina's, there were three things that came to mind. Number one, my staff was used to having cameras around because we got a lot of global press, so I wasn't worried about that. Number two, my customers were used to having microphones in their face because we got so much local press. And number three, selfishly, I thought, well, at least I'll know what happened here the last month in case we're so busy that I won't know what to do. And so I said to Mercedes, I will tell you an honest, open, and transparent story if you promise to retell it with integrity. And we both kept our promises. But talk about the personal. There is an opening scene where I'm getting dressed in the morning and I'm putting on my leg brace. As a polio survivor, I've gone from using a cane to using a brace to using a walker, and now after a fall, I'm in a wheelchair. And I said to Mercedes, why do you want to see me put my brace on? And she said, it's very much like a matador who gets out of bed and they're filled with scars and all the gore marks. But the minute they put on the suit of lights, they become the matador. And when you get up in the morning, nobody knows how you struggle to manage. But the minute that you get dressed and put on the makeup, you become the Ina. And I had to understand and agree with that. So 5 o'clock in the morning, they were there watching me put on my makeup and putting my brace on and leaving the house for the restaurant. So it was very personal, and more so than I even thought that I could reveal.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much that you revealed. And, you know, as you're doing that in the last days of your restaurant, and you see people coming in and people crying and hugging you, I mean, such admiration. Do you ever think that maybe I shouldn't close it? And were you ever thinking about keeping it going after that?
No, never. You know, I think in this life, if you do something as well as you know how, when it's over, it's over. And my walking had become much more challenging, and I could walk from the back of the restaurant to the front, making a stop along the way at a table. But the minute I got up front, I had to sit down on a stool. So my late effects of polio were really helping me to make the decision. And we gave a 4-month closing. Nobody ever does that. They usually lock the doors and lock everybody out. But we wanted to go out with the same integrity with which we had lived.
Well, it's almost like you're like this world famous athlete and going out for the last hurrah of going in like to every stadium and where everyone gets a chance to say goodbye.
That's exactly right.
And it's a celebration of your life and your restaurant, which is pretty unique that you were able to do that. So, you know, hats off to all of you, really.
Well, it was a big decision, and not everybody can pull it off. I mean, to say goodbye for 4 months is a long time, but I wanted, especially the children, to have time to absorb it, because I had known them all and seen them grow. And I wanted them to have their moments with me if that's what they needed. I was very much a part of the family structure in whatever way I was, whether it was a birthday or it was a post-funeral. I mean, I went the gamut. So I wanted to be sure everybody had their moment in that restaurant.
That's so touching that you did that. And, you know, you talk about how it was hard for you to walk, and you had dealt with the effects of polio. And, you know, I don't want to talk too much about what's going on right now in the world, but, you know, I think with coronavirus, it's scary. There's a pandemic, and we're trying to figure out how to adapt to this. And you went through polio, and what was that experience like, and how did you learn to adapt from those times?
First of all, I'm very good at sitting and waiting things out. I was reminded the other day, a friend said to me, people are born with the helping inside of them, or they're not. They either, you know, they somehow have it in them. And I was reminded of when I was 8 years old and I had my second surgery out in Jersey City. And I asked, my dad would bring me books. In those days, I kept you in the hospital for well over a week. And I asked the nurse if she could put me in a wheelchair, and she did. And I went out onto the ward, and I remember the iron lungs out there. There were 3 of them. And I asked the kids, do you want me to read you a story? And they said yes. So I was reading stories, you know, in the ward when I was 8 years old. So I have this sense of the world around me, and I have a sense of being part of it in whatever way I can. So right now I'm part of a group that's been making masks, and we gave out 2,000 masks this week and 1,000 last week to the underserved communities, the Black and brown communities that can't get the things that they need. So I only know how to do that. And that's a result of having had polio at 18 months, without question. I am who I am because of that.
It's quite resilient of you to be able to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have to restaurateurs now who are going through this and being shut down? And, you know, I know you write a column in the Tribune about restaurants, but what have you been doing, and what advice do you give to them?
I have no idea how this ends, and everybody is suffering and everybody is struggling. I marvel at the restaurants that keep feeding the employees and the workers who are so underpaid and have no resources and no safety nets. I really have no idea. The margins are so thin that I can't imagine opening up. If I had to open up with half the tables that I had, which is what happened to me after sort of the recession, I had half the people there that I had before. I wasn't making a living because the expenses are so high. And the thing about the movie, living every day is miraculous enough. You all got up, you got dressed, you got here, we turned on the magic, and here we are. But having my life documented was profound. And Mercedes has a magic about her for pulling the thread just so far so that you get the story without having to go the distance. Because if we pulled every thread, we would have had a miniseries. We could have done a whole thing with my ex-husband, right? We could have just done a whole thing with just the polio.
Yeah.
So Mercedes is the one that you need to thank for whatever you feel.
Well, I felt quite the emotion. Like, I think I got the feeling that I was supposed to feel from it. And sometimes you can tell with the film. And, Mercedes, you kept bringing up instances with Ina's ex-husband and, tying that into her whole, perspective on life. How did you figure out how to tie those parts in with the movie and telling the story of the restaurant and, pulling it all together?
Yeah, well, I think as a filmmaker, it's always really lucky to sort of know the ending point of a story. So it was really nice to be able to use that last 30 days as sort of, a framework for how we could tell the story. And what happened that we weren't really expecting, but I think was really like a happy accident, was that every day that we were shooting, we didn't shoot every single day of those 30 days, but we shot, 4 or 5 days a week. And every day it was almost like a mini story happened in the restaurant. It was almost like themes emerged as we were, shooting. One day, if you all watched the movie, you saw that, Ina talked a lot about her relationship, and there was a man who came in who talked about his same-sex partner, and, she reflected back on her relationship with Bill and, how difficult that was and how the world's changed. And so it just, those moments that were happening real time and sort of current day, I think really just sort of happened naturally and led us to really easily tie in the thread of Ina's longer lifelong story, if that makes sense. So I think that's part of the magic of filmmaking when those kind of happy accidents happen. We were always planning on sort of using that 30 days as a framework and then going back and then coming to current day to keep it moving. But I just think it in some ways magically tied together because the nature of what happened every day, it just was kind of easy to use that framework.
Was it hard to edit? Did you have so much footage?
Yeah, I think it's always hard to kill your darlings, as they say. There's like I said, so many layers of Ina's story that it was a difficult job deciding what to keep in and what to lose. And we had interviewed her. We did 2 very long sit-down interviews. And the one that we did at her house that we used quite a bit was over 3 hours of us sitting there talking to her. I think the other one was 2 hours. So that was 5 hours right there of just sit-down interview. And then we talked to her every day that we were at the restaurant and talked to her customers and, all of those things. So yeah, that part of it was hard. And also I think it's every documentary filmmaker's dream to have someone who's as well-spoken as Ina. And was very press savvy. She was used to speaking. So that was such a blessing that most people don't get, but that also made it hard to cut because everything she says is like a gem, so.
Another thing is too is that you and your husband were the editors in addition to being director and producer. So you're really, cutting your baby in a way.
Right. Yeah.
But it was tight. I mean, it was like, I feel like sometimes when there's too much, you lose some of the story, but you captured it, the essence of Ina so well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
I did the first cut and then I let Songhyun sort of chop back things. And then we came back together and I put some things back and then we kind of had a compromise and we're still married. So it worked out well.
I think the most amazing part is that Mercedes was pregnant when they were filming and then went off to have the baby. And a year went by and I didn't see anything and didn't hear anything. And I thought, well, maybe it just didn't come out. Maybe there were really wonderful moments, but they couldn't weave together to make the movie that she wanted. And then she called me one day and she said, go to your computer, I'm sending you a link. And I had to watch it 3 times to really get it, because I watched it the first time and then I would go, oh, look, there she, oh my God, oh, I remember that day and that was a great day. And I couldn't put it all together. It took me 3 viewings, an hour apart, to really understand what she had created and what she had built for me. It was very overwhelming.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I will say I attribute Ina's restaurant to the fact that our 5-year-old son is quite the foodie, because he ate there every day while he was, and then I held him while I edited half the time too, and he was a little teeny baby. So
yeah. Jasper loves my food internally.
Ina, do you have a lot of advice on edits or things like that to the movie, or did you just like it the way it was?
Oh, I loved it the way it was. And I was very lucky. I think it was in 48 film festivals, and I went to 31 of them. I was invited, and my airfare was taken care of by the people. And I was in the theater every single time. I gave the little introduction, and then I sat down with just to listen, and people laughed and cried and sighed, and it was extraordinary. And they didn't always do it in the same places. So I was very tuned in to where they were responding, so that at the very end during the Q&A, I had a better handle on what it was that touched them. I had the most magical 1.5 years traveling with this movie.
Which was also a blessing as a filmmaker, because I probably went to 10 to 15 of those screenings, but it's really hard for me to go to all of them. So to be able to have Ina represent the film was amazing.
It's terrific.
And that's who people want to see anyway. Let's be real.
Is that typical though, to be in 48 film festivals?
Not really. I mean, I guess it depends on the film, but I feel like, yeah, it was great. It's amazing. I mean, I think the thing that's nice is that even though it's a Chicago story, it really resonates. It can resonate anywhere,
Right.
Absolutely.
It didn't have a time stamp on it, and it also didn't have a city stamp on it. It could have been anywhere at any time. And the fact that we were in the Chicago International Film Festival as the world premiere was sort of mind-blowing. We've gone to those festivals for years and looked at those movies, and then, oh my God, there's Mercedes' movie right there on the screen. And we have one wonderful photograph of everybody during the movie, just intent and sitting forward like this and watching it. It just melts your heart.
Absolutely does. And, it's such a wonderful success for an independent film. I mean, how many films have you done, Mercedes? And is it hard to do independence? And, how do you get it financed and get, make a living through it?
That's probably the hardest part. Yeah, I have directed 3 films. I produced a couple films, but a more recent one with my husband. And now I'm working on another film. And yeah, it's really tough. There's, it's either going out and finding private investors or doing grants, which is almost a full-time job in itself. So, I mean, I've always kind of worked lean and mean, and that's why, it was really just a really small crew for Ina's. We didn't really have a ton of budget. I do a lot of corporate and commercial work too. So that's sort of where some of my bread and butter comes from. And I also, in that way, meet a lot of people and find people who are willing to work on things for lessened rates, or, kind of work with me for stories that are meaningful that they don't always have the opportunity to tell. So that's nice. But yeah, right now.
And I fed you every day.
That was a
good incentive for the crew, for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's a big part of it, the food.
It is.
Yeah,
you didn't have to travel out of town to do it,
Exactly. Yeah.
And, this is just, I guess, a question I'm curious about. You said you try to get a lot of grants. Do you have to be a nonprofit to get a grant, or will they give grants to for-profit productions?
Well, I actually am a nonprofit. Daisy May Films is a 501c3. So yes, but then you can also get fiscal sponsorships from a lot of places.
Sure.
So that helps.
Mercedes, would you just give a few sentences about the other movies that you have done?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I did a movie about a congenital heart surgeon, and sort of that journey with, congenital heart defects and, families. And then I did a movie about Haiti during the 2010 earthquake and a team of medical responders who ended up kind of unexpectedly being stationed at one of the only standing hospitals in Haiti during that time. And then I went back to Haiti with them on a return trip. And then INAS, and now I'm working on a few projects, but one that's local to Chicago is a film about Art and Pep, who are the owners of the bar Sidetrack in Boys Town and also co-founded Quality, Illinois. And so it's really a story. They have a 46-plus-year love story. They have really built, a business district that's, one of the only LGBTQ business districts in the country still standing. They've done a ton of advocating. So it's really kind of the LGBTQ movement in Chicago through their eyes. And there's kind of, a lot of different layers to that story as well. So we are in production on that and also fundraising still. So.
Okay. When do you
Yeah.
expect it to be able to be released?
Well, it's interesting for a lot of documentary filmmakers right now is that COVID is really getting in our way. It's hard, they're both in their mid 70s too. So, it's hard. They're not out and about, obviously, as no one is. Sidetrack is closed. So we're actually finding ways to continue to shoot them during this pandemic because this is a historical moment too. So we're kind of navigating that right now, but we're kind of at the earlier stages of that project. So,
Sure.
and also COVID's gotten in the way of fundraising too, as you can imagine, because people are not giving money to films. And we have a lot of interested people in investing in this because there's a huge audience for it too. But everything's a little bit on pause.
Well, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to capture this story of what's going on right now from the eyes of many different communities. So, I hope that you're able to get something, down now and then be able to share that with the story, because I think it's important. I think it's important to share the stories of people getting through a struggle and, shining from it, like Ina, with your story. Now, how did you get into writing for the Tribune and doing what you're doing now? When did that start?
I always say in the Midwest, everybody is very polite. And if you ask for something and they say no, kind of the blinders, you go, oh, okay. But New Yorkers, and especially girls from Brooklyn, if you say no, my blinders are like this. And I go, what else could I do in that regard? So I was at a book review. I wrote a book, a memoir cookbook called Ina's Kitchen. And I was doing a reading one night, and Monica Eng was the moderator. And she said, have you ever met the editor of the food section, at the Trib? And I said, no, but I would love to be introduced because I want to thank them for all the column inches that they gave me. And she said, oh, sure, afterward, we'll do it. So we're doing the talk, and then there's a Q&A. And in the back, one hand goes up, and a woman says, Ina, where are you eating breakfast now? And only one head in the whole place went like that and went like that. And I said, I bet that's Joe. He loved the question, but he wants my answer. I just got a column. So I wrote the next day and said, what do you think? Once a month, 3 restaurants, a conversation, not a critical food review. I'm not going to tell you that I wish they had used different bread on the French toast. I want to just talk just like I did in the restaurant to you. So you would know when you walked in, oh, there's a skylight in the back and it's great to sit back there. And yeah, you should try this and this. And 3 hours later, he wrote back and he said, when I saw that you wanted to do this, I knew I wanted you at the Trib, and here's a contract.
Wow. It's amazing. It's amazing what can happen just by asking, right?
You always say the answer to every question you do not ask is no.
That is a great point.
So that's how I got that. I also was able to travel with the book. So I did a book tour. And then when the movie, I was with the film festival circuit, they would always buy books and I would sign them afterward. And so everybody had a complete experience. And then companies hired me to talk about breakfast because once I had the column, it extended my brand as the breakfast queen. And
Yes.
so all of a sudden, companies would say, can you go out to the CIA in Napa and talk about breakfast to this particular group? And the answer was yes. I never did an infomercial. I never said, this is the brand and you have to use it. I only talked about breakfast and I let their people talk about the product. I was not going to do an infomercial. I needed to stay clear as the expert in breakfast.
Well, you're authentic. I think that's what people love, that, they would come to your restaurant, they saw how much you cared, and how much you became part of them, and that's what people love. That authenticity is everything, right?
It is connection and authenticity. It's absolutely, that's what makes a restaurant a restaurant.
Yeah. Do you still stay in touch with a lot of the people who would be regular customers?
Yes, they write to me all the time. Plus, I started doing a newsletter when I first started the restaurant back in 1991. I had a friend who was doing PR for a lot of restaurants, and I said, Nancy, if you were opening a restaurant tomorrow, what would you do? And she said, I would write a newsletter first of every month. And I said, what do you mean a newsletter? She goes, 2 sides, that's it. Just talk about things, selling, education, marketing, whatever it is. And I said, oh, that's a really interesting idea. So I went home that night and I wrote out 2 sides and I faxed it to her. We went back a long way. I faxed it to her and she called me kind of breathless. And she said, do you know how many people have paid me a fortune for advice and never, ever took it? And this is what I would do. This is exactly right. So the first of every month since 1991, I have written a newsletter. And in those days, we would do a trifold and we'd handwrite, because we were collecting addresses, and handwrite the address. And then if I would see you hadn't been in a while, I would get a Post-it note. And inside the fold, I would say, Erin, I haven't seen you. I've been thinking about you. And your heart would just burst and you would come back in right away.
It's brilliant.
And then we went to naturally printed addresses, but never stamped. I always got a heart stamp, always hand done on there. And then of course I had to go email, because 2,600 people wanted it every single month. And
Yeah.
I still write it. I write it every single month. I'll write it today and get it out tomorrow at 4:00. I've been doing that since 1991.
Wow.
And and because it goes email, they hit reply. And so I hear from people all the time.
It's incredible.
I know, it is incredible.
Yes.
It's kind of a guerrilla marketing thing. I never wanted to be in the food section of the paper. It has the lowest readership and the most fickle. I wanted to be in human interest. I wanted to be in real estate. I wanted to be in business. Once I even got into sports, don't ask me about that. But I wanted to be everywhere except the food section. Because if you never read the food section, but all of a sudden you see me in human interest, you're going to go, who is that person?
I think we have some similarities in how we market. My business, I'm in real estate, right? But all of what I'm doing is sharing human interest stories, because nobody wants to hear, the business that you're in all the time. They want to learn and hear the stories and see what you're sharing. And I do a newsletter too, about once a week, where I'm just sharing the podcast. Or yesterday I sent something out about how I'm going to be talking to you today. So I think it resonates with people. You hear from people that you haven't heard from in a while, and I think it can move them to hear a story that inspires them.
This is very true. This is very true. So my experience, having gone through this with Mercedes and Sangoon was, as I said, it was profound. It was profound. I haven't watched the movie in a while, but it's on my agenda for maybe next week. I think it's important that I sit down and watch it again, for the memories and for the joy that it brought me and gave me a life of travel for 1.5 years. That was magical.
Well, I felt joy when I was watching it. It took me away from the present, and it was just beautiful. But you are so dedicated in everything that what you do. I mean, where do you think that you got that from growing up and being able to persevere? I mean, in the movie you talked about how you were like the adult as a child, right?
Right. The picture behind me, my dad, I got him into modeling when he turned 50, and he's hanging on the wall up there. He was the one. He was the one that said, you only have to get up one more time, then you fall.
Yep.
And that's the truth, isn't it?
It sure is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, it pushed you through. The relationship with your mother was tough. And did you ever resolve anything with her, or
No,
no?
Jewish mothers
Yeah.
don't do that. Jewish mothers don't resolve anything. No,
Yeah. They
no,
hold
I
a
didn't.
grudge.
I had my dad though, and he was everything.
Yeah.
He was
Um,
everything. He would have loved Mercedes and the kids. He would have.
well, he definitely would have loved everything here. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
he'd
Hmm.
be proud, very, very proud. One of the questions we got from the audience is, the owner of Azul 18 worked for you. And I guess when the JCC Chicago did the Rhodes Scholar programming in Pilsen, he spoke so beautifully about what he had learned working from you. Do you stay in touch with him?
I do. As about he's in the movie. When I'm sitting at a table and holding his hand, he had started a problem in the kitchen. And at the
Oh,
end of the
yeah.
day, we had that conversation. And very quietly, I said, you hurt me. It hurt my heart when you did that. And he's a darling, darling, hardworking man. And he's got a wonderful breakfast restaurant. And I helped him with that.
That's awesome. That's great that you're able to pass that on. Did you think about at all for, maybe not including that in the movie, or was that something that was?
No, I think it was important. And Mercedes knew that too. When she edited, when I said women change the culture, that line.
Mhm.
And then she was able to find some clips of where I did things differently than other people did. And because I was an older woman, I was older than some of their grandmothers. So, as much as they wanted to hate me, they couldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I always love the line of, don't mistake my kindness for weakness, because
Oh, yeah. They knew that too. I never
Yeah.
had to raise my voice.
Yeah. Did you ever lose your cool at the restaurant?
Only when I saw somebody that was with potential to hurt somebody or themselves. That's
Okay.
the only time. If I saw something that looked dangerous, that's all. But other than that, I'd walk over very quietly, and they knew that they were in big trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. That's the scariest. The quiet.
Restaurants are the hardest business in the world. And so my heart is breaking for everybody that is struggling now. And there could be 35% of the restaurants that are closed now that will never open again. Toast just closed down permanently. That was a small breakfast restaurant on Webster and over on Damon. And she was in business for 24 years. And she just said, I just can't weather this storm. There's not enough money coming in from any relief funds, and I can't do it. People don't know that the margins are really, really, really small.
Yeah.
Many people go out. I mean, they thought we were, as we say in Yiddish, umgestopft mit Geld. They thought I was, loaded. Even the staff. Oh, you rich? No, no. And not when eggs jumped up for one day to $93. A case of butter went to $93 from $38
Whoa.
in one day. And then it comes back down again. But that day I needed the butter. So all of a sudden that's what I had to pay. Maple syrup, $75 a gallon. What do you put in your car now? $2 a gallon?
Right.
Maple syrup, $75 a gallon. And then I see people pouring it over the pancakes and I go, oh, damn, they are IHOP people. They haven't even tasted the pancake. The margins are very, very thin, people. Be kind.
Yeah.
So my heart is very heavy right now for the people who are suffering. And I don't know how this is going to play out, but it's not going to be good or easy.
No, I was listening to a conversation, an interview on a podcast with Sam Harris. I don't know if you listened to him, but he was interviewing the person who is the owner of the company that does, all the different websites. I'm totally blanking right now. But anyway, they're talking about the future of food and restaurants. And, if the pandemic lasts a long time and people are afraid to go into places, are we going to have basically just commercial kitchens that are going to have, high sanitary standards, and then just everything is delivered? I mean, I think that would kill cities if you did that, don't you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because those restaurants in neighborhoods is what makes a neighborhood.
Right.
Retail and restaurants in small neighborhoods. I mean, go up to Andersonville. It's a small individual things. Don't have any chain up there. There's no chain restaurants. If they don't open up, the whole thing is going to look desolate.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. What do you think of restaurants doing GoFundMe's?
Everybody has to figure out how to maintain their employees, and I have no issue with anybody as long as they get the money. I don't really, however you have to do it. I don't know if I would have been able to sustain this at all without doing that. I
Right.
don't know. I don't think so.
It
I mean,
probably-
during the recession, we never laid anybody off and we paid everybody full salary, and I went into debt for 5 years,
oh boy.
you know, so I
How,
know.
how did you get out of it? I mean, were you able just to really grow your business again? To the
No,
point-
never. Never. I used to do 450 people on a Sunday in 6 hours. And then after the recession, it was down to 300, 275, 310. That's not the money I needed on a Sunday to make up for a slow week. No, we were in debt to the end, right to the end.
And
I'm
that's-
so proud of that.
At least you're
But I
done.
didn't hurt anybody, you know, and I paid off every single vendor. Every single vendor. I
Yeah.
didn't care. As I said, I had to leave with the same integrity with which I lived, and every vendor got every single dime, and all my employees were paid above and beyond till the end. Do I miss it?
Yeah,
No.
The upper relief. Well, actually, if you went back to when you were 37 years old, when you started it, would you have done the same type of restaurant, or would you have been a writer?
I baked my first cake when I was 37, and I opened a bakery, a special order bakery that was a sort of a dessert catering, and I had a big wholesale business. I taught myself to bake at that age, and I had a big wholesale business. So restaurants didn't have pastry kitchens or pastry chefs in those days, going back to, 1980, 82. And so I was the outsourcing of all of that stuff. And then I had breakfast out every day with the fabulous ex-husband. And I just said, can't anybody make a decent breakfast? The food was grim in the 80s. The coffee was insipid and it was just terrible food. And he said, listen, every day we go out to eat and you eat butter, flour, sugar, and eggs. What do you use at the restaurant, at the bakery every day? Butter, flour, sugar, and eggs. I went, well, I'm going to open up a breakfast restaurant like nobody has ever seen. And I did.
Yeah, and it worked.
And it worked. It worked for 23 years.
Yeah. You didn't touch on this as much in the movie. Maybe I missed, but you seem to have such a great relationship with your ex, and then it ended, and he went on the trip for a year and everything. Did that really make it much harder when he went away for so long?
No, in case people don't know, Captain Bill Pinkney sailed around the world solo, and he was the first Black man to do that before or since. And he was on a 47-foot boat and went under the 5 Great Capes. And he was gone for just about 2 years. And no, when he came back, he was a different guy, but that's only because of the struggle out there on the water. He said there were some people he could tell other sailors certain stories. He could tell other solo sailors certain stories. And then there were some stories he could never tell. I mean, he was hallucinating. He was sick. It was a tough 2 years. And I just knew his life needed to be on the water. That was what it was about. When he called me after he left Westminster Abbey, he was the captain of the slave ship Amistad after he came back. And he walked out of Westminster Abbey and called me. And he said, I was just sitting behind the Queen, and they were having the 200th anniversary of the cessation of the slave trade here in London. He said, and I can't even tell you what it feels like to be me right now. And that's when I knew. And that's when I knew. And I just said, honey, it's time for divorce. And he quietly said, I know.
Because he just wanted to be continually.
He needed to be on the water. And he has a big catamaran. He lives in Puerto Rico. And he charters the boat. That's what his life, his best life. I mean, we both left the marriage better people than we found it.
That's impressive. I mean, do you ever speak with him still?
Probably twice a month.
Okay.
We never forgot why we loved each other. And I think Mercedes was able to capture that in the movie.
Yeah, it was a love story,
It still is. It still is.
Well, I'm saying the movie.
Yeah, it was. It was a love story that Mercedes gave to me.
Yeah.
I'm
Mercedes,
so lucky, Mercedes. I'm so lucky you found me.
Too
Oh
kind
my,
to me.
no
but it's
kidding.
the truth. It was the truth. There was an article on the front page of the Tribune announcing my closing, and it said, "The Breakfast Queen to Abdicate." And she read that article, which was a big article, front page, and then a whole page inside. And I had no idea that she was in the restaurant eating, and then she called and said, "Can we talk to you?" And the answer was, "Of course you can." And what are we eating? I miss my food.
I do too. I just made Ina's sour cream coffee cake from her.
How was it? Was
recipe
it good?
for Easter. It was,
Was
yeah, so good. I'm pretty sure I gained 5 pounds from it, but
That's
yeah.
good. That's good. I should have brought my book over here.
Okay, nobody really can see you.
Right. Exactly.
Breakfast
At
at
this point, it
Ina's.
doesn't matter.
It's a memoir and a cookbook. So all my recipes from the restaurant are in there, which
Where
is
can you
very
order them from, by the way?
Anyway, Book Hub. Don't go to Amazon. I hate that company. So Book Hub. Or
Oh,
any
that's where the
independent-
movie's on Amazon. So.
Oh yeah, we love Amazon Prime for the movie. Just don't buy the books there because small independent bookstores really need the money.
Oh, they do. You know, there's a bookstore I've had on, Bookends and Beginnings. I don't know if you know.
I love her. I just love her.
She is
She
wonderful.
won a James Beard, Nina Barrett. She won a James Beard for an episode of a thing she did about frying food. And
Really?
she came here and we fried everything in chicken fat.
Oh, that's amazing.
I know. Somebody just posted where to buy the book. Did you see that?
Yes, and also your book is being sold at Bookends and Beginnings. So there's
Oh,
so
there we
everyone
go.
knows they are a small independent bookseller in the alley
Evans.
in downtown Evanston. And
Yeah.
she has had an article that came out in the Tribune about her struggle with getting funds from the government and staying open as an independent. So yeah, I think I might buy the book from her after this.
There's some good stories in there, and there's just very sweet little stories in there.
Yeah.
Very
Well,
Really great recipes.
Great.
and great recipes.
You know, Mercedes, you spent so much time with Ina, and I'm sure you've learned a lot. What are some of the greatest pieces of advice you got from her?
Oh, wow. I mean, the one at the end, I think it's in the credits, maybe is one of your friends says it, about how it takes more energy to be afraid. And
to
that's
be
something
courageous.
that,
Mhm.
yeah. And that's something I think is really wise and I think about often.
Yeah. No, that's a great piece of advice. And I just love how, like, Mercedes, you went for it. You had this great idea to do this movie, and you just approached Ina about it. And Ina, like, everything you've done in your life has been about that. And it's just so great to capture it. And anyone who's on this call, I hope you've seen the film. You probably have, but if you haven't, you definitely should. It is a really good pick-me-up to hear this inspirational story. We are going to be wrapping up soon, but if anybody has any other questions, please put it in the chat. Happy to ask them for you. But in terms of film, I know we're going through a lot right now where you can't really get out and do filming as much or interviewing people. What are some other thoughts of ideas for other, I know you're working on a film right now, but what are some other films that you're thinking about doing in the future?
Well, I have a couple other series that I've been out pitching with. I have a producing partner in LA. One we've been working on for the past 2 years, which is kind of dark. It's about these Kentucky boys camps that were operating for like 30 years in Kentucky, and were supposed to be really rehabilitative for juvenile minor offenders. And it turned out they were really abusive, and there were some murders. And
Oh boy.
so that is one. Yeah, that's we pitched it too. It's very dark and sad, but the family of one of the boys that was killed back in the 70s is connected to some of my family in Kentucky. So that's how I found the story. And we've shot about 30 hours for that, but we're still trying to find the right home for it. We actually pitched it all around LA. And what's interesting with COVID happening now, there was kind of a lull with it. It's a difficult project to take on, I think, just because it is so dark. But people, like networks, are now reinterested again because no one can go out and shoot anything. So production is really stopped. So now we've kind of garnered more interest again because we have the 30 hours of footage. So we just pitched it last week to Epix. We're waiting to hear back, and hopefully maybe this will help it find its home in a weird way, you know? So I think
Content
that's
is
one
important.
good thing for filmmakers who have projects in progress. If they have footage shot, it could actually really be helpful right now to get it out there because production's paused everywhere, really.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And Ina, when do you, are you still writing for the Tribune right now, or are you paused? in some-
No, yeah, I'm on hiatus now because I can't go out to restaurants, you know.
Right.
So hopefully we'll be able to pick it up again soon.
Yeah.
I miss writing, but I'll go do my newsletter today.
Well, I think, one idea is, maybe to have some interviews with some of the restaurateurs and share their stories of how they're staying open right now. I mean, I think that could be something interesting that
I'm
people.
working on a podcast with Penny Powlick, who was the food critic at the Chicago Magazine for years. So we are going to be launching a podcast soon and be talking to different chefs and different people in the business about what this was like and what their expectations are.
I'd love to
You know,
listen.
I was listening to another podcast, and I had sent in a question, and the question was, when restaurants reopen, I think they're going to have to change the vibe inside. For example, the restaurants with very loud music, I don't think that's going to fly because we're all so tender. You know, this has made us all very careful and to protect ourselves and our hearts and all of this. And so I think there's going to be just sort of a difference. You know, you're going to walk into a restaurant that you used to go to that was bangy clangy. It's not going to be okay anymore.
No.
So everything is going to change from the distancing to the music.
Yeah, it's a total change in the global society.
The thing that's so fascinating to me is that it is global. You know, this is the first time that we can't say, oh, this is Chicago, or this is New York, or this is the US. Every single person everywhere is going through this. Everywhere. That's what's so amazing to me.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
It is horrifying.
Yeah, no kidding.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think the stories of resiliency and adaptivity that you shared through this film, hopefully is something that people can take and learn how to, move forward as we go through these challenging times. But, Ina and Mercedes and the JCC, I want to thank you all and everyone who's been on today. And anyone who will be watching this on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please watch the film, watch Mercedes' other films, buy Ina's book at Bookends and Beginnings, Ina's Kitchen, Memories and Recipes from the Breakfast Queen. But stay well, everybody. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all. Thank you.
It was a
Stay
pleasure.
healthy.